So what you're saying is you knew that you might possibly infect Ms. Wheeler if you had unprotected sex with her, so you put on a condom in order to protect her.
Right. Then I went back out into the living room. We got it on. And then I split.
Well, now, let's move ahead to the night of August 3rd, the night that you and Mr. Fickett robbed the liquor store. Tell me what happened after you entered the store.
It happened just like Sam said. When we walked in, we said it was a stick-up. The owner was behind the counter, and she was there. Detective Hughes, buying some wine. Of course, at that point, we didn't know she was a cop. Anyway, we pulled out our pieces. We took her purse and jewelry. Then we made them both get down on the floor and told them don't move for 15 minutes. Then we took off, out into the back alley where the van was parked.
And while all this was going on, did you have any intention of doing the owner or Detective Hughes any bodily harm?
No way. All we wanted was the money and out of there.
Your Honor, the defendant has just admitted that he and his accomplice were both carrying guns. Now, he contends he had no intention of harming his victims?
The guns were just to scare them.
You expect the jury to believe that?
Mr. Nevins, you will speak only in response to a direct question. Mr. Benedict, if you have an objection, please state it. Otherwise, you're out of order. You may proceed, Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Your Honor. Tell us what happened after you went into the alley.
Well, we got into the van and I started it up. Sam was looking through the lady's wallet. He sees her ID and he tells me we got trouble because she's a cop. Then he looks out his side view mirror and he says, oh man, she's behind us in the alleyway, writing down our license plate. And I lost it. It was like I snapped, you know?
Tell us what you mean when you say that you snapped, Mr. Nevins.
What those guys did to me in the joint. The way they raped me. It all came rushing back to me. And how the cops didn't do nothing to help me. Next thing I know, I'm jumping out of the van and I grab her. I can't even remember so clear what happened next, but I guess Sam helped me drag her into the van and I had him hold her down while I, did it. And then in the middle of it, it was like, suddenly I came to again, and it hit me. I got this virus in me. That's why I pulled out of her before, you know? So I wouldn't pass it on to her. Then we let her go. Got the hell out of there.
You let her go? Mr. Nevins, during the time that you were in the van with Detective Hughes, where was your gun?
In my pocket.
You had your gun in your pocket, yet you let Detective Hughes go. Did it ever occur to you to kill her?
No, sir. I never once thought about killing her. Not once. And that's the God's truth.
Would you please state your full name for the record, Mr. Phillips?
George Phillips, with 2 L's.
You're the owner of the liquor store that was held up by Mr. Fickett and Mr. Nevins on the night of August 3rd.
Well, the former owner. See, after the robbery, I was so afraid of going back to work in that neighborhood.
But you owned the store, and you were in it along with Detective Hughes on the night of the robbery in question, correct?
Yes.
During the robbery, did Mr. Nevins or Mr. Fickett say or do anything that might indicate to you that they intended to do anything more than simply rob you of the cash you had on hand in the store?
Well, they held guns on us both. And after they made us lie down on the floor and they were about to leave, they told us not to move for 15 minutes or they'd come back and blow our brains out. And that's a quote.
But we now know that to be an empty threat, because as a matter of fact, Detective Hughes did get up and walk out into the alley long before the 15 minutes were up, and they neither fired at her or returned to shoot you. So even though Mr. Nevins had both the means and the opportunity to cause you bodily harm, he did not harm you, did he?
No, but...
Thank you, sir. No further questions.
Does the prosecution wish to cross-examine?
We certainly do, Your Honor. Mr. Phillips, when the defendant and his accomplice threatened to blow your brains out, did Did you take this threat seriously, or did you think they were bluffing?
Oh, no, ma'am. I took it very seriously. That's why, well, before Mrs. Hughes went out in the alley, she told me to run across the street and use the payphone and call 911. But I didn't, because I was afraid if I made a move, they would come back and kill me like they said they would.
So at that moment, you honestly thought that Mr. Nevins and Mr. Fickett were capable of committing murder?
Objection, Your Honor. She's leading.
Withdrawn. Mr. Phillips, the fact is, you did eventually get up, and you went across the street and you called 911. And you took these actions long before the fatal 15 minutes had elapsed. Would you please tell the court why you did that, if, as you said, you took their threat seriously?
Well, you see, after Mrs. Hughes went out into the alley, I heard the back door close and lock behind her. And I knew she was trapped out there. And then I heard her scream. It was an awful, blood-curdling scream. And I thought, my Lord, they are killing her. And I knew then that I had to risk it and get help.
So your first thought when you heard Mrs. Hughes scream was that they were killing her?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. No further questions.
Redirect.
No, Your Honor.
You may step down, Mr. Phillips. Mr. Clark, do you have anything further?
No, Your Honor. Defense rests.
In that case, I'm calling a 1-hour recess for lunch. Court will reconvene at 2:30, at which time counsel will make their closing arguments. And then, after the jury completes their deliberations, the courtroom will be open to the public and the press for the verdict.
All right.
Mr. Benedict, are you ready to make your closing statement?
I am, Your Honor. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, did Elroy Nevins attempt to murder Margot Hughes when he raped her on the night of August 3rd? Well, we have established the fact that at the time of the rape, Elroy Nevins knew that he carried HIV, a precursor to AIDS, which is a fatal and, at this point in time, incurable disease. We have also established that Mr. Nevins knew full well that one of the ways to transmit this virus is through sexual intercourse. He knew this both from his conversations with Dr. Seltzer and from the numerous pamphlets that he had read on the subject. Now, those are the simple facts. And nothing that the defense has presented during this trial has done anything to contradict them. Now, as far as the supposed reason why Mr. Nevins felt compelled to rape Mrs. Hughes, the traumatic feelings he claims to have had from prison, well, that has no bearing on this case whatsoever. And all this business about wearing a condom when he raped and infected Ms. Wheeler, or that he purposely withdrew prior to ejaculating for Mrs. Hughes' protection, well, that is patent nonsense, and you know it as well as I do. Mr. Nevins knew exactly what he was doing when he violated this woman. Mr. Nevins knew exactly what the consequences could be for her. Mr. Nevins said to Dr. Seltzer, if I am going to die, then why should I give a damn about anybody else? And that is why I am asking you to return a verdict of guilty of attempted murder with maximum aggravation, which carries with it a sentence of 60 years on top of the sentence that Mr. Nevins will receive for armed robbery and rape. Now, maybe to some of you this seems harsh, but I ask you to remember what I said during my opening statement. What sentence would you deem fair if I were to tell you that Elroy Nevins deliberately injected Margot Hughes on the night of August 3rd with a slow-acting and lethal poison against her will while his accomplice held her down? Attempted murder? Most definitely. Ladies and gentlemen, it is possible that Mr. Nevins could be sentenced to only 6 years for the rape. It is also conceivable that he could live longer than 6 years with the virus. Look at him. Has he shown even an ounce of remorse during this trial? Do you really believe that he won't rape again if he has the chance? Do you really want this animal back out on the streets after 6 years? Put him away, ladies and gentlemen. Put him away for whatever time he has left on this earth. Put him away so that he will never again destroy the lives of innocent women. Thank you.
Mr. Benedict's closing summary was very eloquent and very persuasive. But your job here is to follow the letter of the law. And the law defines attempted murder as the intent to cause the death of another person. So if you have any reasonable doubt whatsoever that that was Mr. Nevin's intent against Margot Hughes, then you must return a verdict of not guilty. What were Mr. Nevin's intentions on the night of August 3rd? Only to rob the liquor store? He never even intended to commit rape. It wasn't until that moment out there in the alley when he realized that Mrs. Hughes was a police officer, when he was overcome by the painful memory of his own brutal rape in prison and his understandable rage at the prison authorities who did nothing to protect him from that brutal humiliation, that only in that emotional moment did he begin to rape Detective Hughes. And even then, even in that highly emotional state, he still somehow managed to remember Dr. Seltzer's admonition against unprotected sex and purposely withdrew prior to ejaculation so that he wouldn't infect her with HIV. If Mr. Nevins really wanted to kill Detective Hughes, wouldn't it have made more sense to shoot her? He had a gun in his possession. He never even took it out of his pocket. There's another important fact for you to consider here. And that is, as far as we know, Mr. Nevins did not transmit HIV to Detective Hughes. As a matter of fact, there's a 98% certainty that she was not infected. And even if she were to develop the virus, HIV is not lethal. Only AIDS is fatal. And who's to say when or if someone with HIV will contract AIDS? It could take years, and a cure could be developed tomorrow. Therefore, is this virus really a lethal weapon? Think about that, because as the judge will instruct you, the law states that in order for a person to be found guilty of attempted murder, they must be in possession of a lethal weapon. So, as you adjourn for your deliberation, keep all the evidence before you. Separate fact from fiction, the plain truth from supposition. And I have no doubt but that you will concur with me that the prosecution has no case here, and you will return a verdict of not guilty. Thank you for your time and your attention.